Spare. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, continuing my analysis of Harry's autobiography, letting you know the matters that he touches on, and more importantly, looking at it in terms of understanding the mindset behind what he writes, interpreting it in relation to the fact that he's the victim of a narcissist, interpreting it with regard to the fog in which he finds himself enveloped, the heightening of his own narcissistic traits, the reduction of emotional empathy for people as to why he's writing the things that he does, ascertaining whether what has been written is something that has a foundation in truth. Has it been lacquered by an alternative view from the future? Today, Harry writing in a way to taint the views of yesterday, Harry. And of course, to what extent do we see the presence of Harry's wife in all of this? The next chapter recalls being back at Eton, and all of a sudden, 9/11 is being reported on the television, showing some, as he describes it, some buildings on fire, and he learns that it's in New York. And he talks about how people are jumping from the buildings. Somebody talked about World War III. And it's interesting because he ends this with so much chaos, so much pain. What can be done? What can we do? What will we be called to do? Days later, I turned 17. And then that's it. It merits 2 pages. Now, it's interesting because 9/11 was one of those events where if you ask anybody, they'll be able to tell you where they were on that day as the news filtered through. I recall I was having a discussion with somebody on the telephone, and this was back when you used to get text updates about the news. And I recall I was on the telephone to an individual, and through on my phone came the message that a plane had hit the Twin Towers. And I remember thinking at the time, it's a civil accident. The relevant civil aviation authority will be involved, and that's an unfortunate accident that occurred. And at this juncture, a further message came through telling me that a plane had hit the Pentagon. And I remember distinctly saying to the gentleman that I was talking with, Bob, I've just received a message that the Pentagon has been hit by a plane. And he said, I'll call you back, HG. And we ended the call. And I then went and turned on the television and was met with that image of smoke streaming from one of the Twin Towers. So I remember distinctly where I was in the world and who I was talking to, and then what followed thereafter as a consequence of learning this news. I can't go into any more detail as it would give away what I do professionally, but one remembers, and one could write in detail about the events of that day where one was, even though I wasn't in the United States and I wasn't directly affected as a consequence of the planes crashing into the building. I didn't have any family members in there. I didn't have friends that were in there compared to other people that were affected by it. And it's interesting because with Prince Harry, okay, he's young, but old enough to remember it distinctly. It's almost, some planes hit some buildings, and that was 9/11. And then we're on to the next chapter. So it's quite interesting how little regard he pays to it. Maybe that is demonstrative of his mindset at the time. It then moves on, and he's back to his favourite topic, his mother. And he remarks about how he would often say to himself that perhaps today's the day that his mum would reappear. And he says that it's been 4 years since the accident, and he would have these dreams about her, and that he said that he was like a religious fanatic, waiting for the day that she would come back. And he says again, and it's a little bit like the sort of Gollum-Smeagol moments of arguing with himself about saying, look, she's dead, you need to move on. And then part of him would say, well, I'll believe it when I get some solid proof. And he says that will then allow him to properly mourn and cry and then be able to move on. Again, it's another short chapter, but it demonstrates how he punctuates this. And I think the clear impression one gets is that the loss of his mother is an ever-present in the background for him, that each and every day is impacting upon him and thinking about it, and therefore I think he's trying to convey that, or at least the ghostwriter is seeking to convey that in the book by making repeated reference of it. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are in relation to him making reference to his mother in the publication. We know that he's banged on about her a lot in interviews and so forth, but what do you think about the fact of him making mention of it in the book? Do you think he's obsessed with his mother's death? Do you think it's right that it's mentioned in the way that it is, so that he conveys the impact that it's had upon him? And also, what do you think he ought to do about it? And what is interesting is that he has talked about being in therapy, and it doesn't seem to my mind that it's helped him one iota. And one wonders if he's been shunted in front of those kind of therapists that are into sort of swing this bit of crystal in front of your face and it'll make you suddenly get better, and let's burn some herbs or something and inhale all of that. No, not wacky backy. And all of a sudden you'll be transcending to a different plane and you'll be able to make sense of all of this. Or whether he's actually sat down with someone that's offered constructive analysis and guidance as to what has happened to him. Either way, it doesn't really appear to have had much impact upon him. And he does, of course, come across now as a particularly troubled individual who has sought solace in drink and drugs in order to deal with the loss that he has suffered. Also, to what extent has he actually tried to move on? Has he just decided that I'm forever going to be the obsessed lonely prince that lost his mum, and that's the role that I have, and I'm just going to keep banging on about her? Or has he made a genuine attempt to deal with the grief? Or has he decided, no, I'll just stay in martyr mode, feel sorry for me? Maybe more of this will become clearer as we delve into the book. So 9/11 gets the briefest of mentions, which is interesting of itself, particularly, of course, with his comments later on about shooting up the Taliban, because he wanted to sort of make them pay for being the baddies in relation to 9/11. Perhaps his view altered as he learned a bit more about the world and got older, as opposed to the sort of very superficial acknowledgement that he pays to 9/11 at the time. And then once again, of course, Darling Mummy makes her appearance. May we find some more meaty material coming up? I think so, because there's a bit of hedonism on the horizon. Join me there.